I've had the opportunity to be at the NITI Aayog, and I walk through those corridors. I see so many offices with such eminent names. It is a kind of a mystery that what's actually happening in this institution.
Public policy, it's all aspects of our life, from cradle to grave. NITI Aayog is an amazing experiment by the Prime Minister. Why should we only rely on external think tanks for our policy formulation? We should have our own think tank. Public policy should be seen as a pyramid. Best public policy is which comes from the people, what the people demand. And for that, what you need to do is to, even there, once you get there, it is not sure that you can make the impact that you want to make. Because then you face Japan or US or Canada or UK, people outside the government, they are as important, if not even a more important role, formulating and implementing public policy.
Namaste, Rajiv ji.
Namaskar.
Thank you for coming to Rishigod University and addressing our students once again.
Great pleasure.
So the topic that we chose today at the boot camp was public policy in daily life. So for people typically who are outside Delhi, this whole public policy is something like a big mystical thing that they don't know actually what it is about. You served as the vice chairperson of the NITI Aayog, which is like a cabinet rank minister, right? I've had the opportunity to be at the NITI Aayog, and I walk through those corridors. I see so many offices with such eminent names. But even to me, it is a kind of a mystery that what's actually happening in this institution, because we keep hearing about it, we keep reading about the NITI Aayog. So if you could help us demystify the institution a bit and tell us what exactly does the NITI Aayog do?
Shobit, thanks for inviting me again, and great pleasure to be here. And I think Rishi is coming up in a good way. First, let me tell you about public policy, because it should not be such a mystery. Because ultimately, you see what has happened, the way to look at it is that there is a social contract between the government and the people about what, that's the Rousseau's good old thing like that. And public policy is the instrument to delivering the social contract by the government to the people. And therefore, everybody is a stakeholder in this public policy. And public policy, therefore, affects all aspects of our life in every which way. From cradle to grave. Public policy is required because the laws are all of that. So that's the one thing that therefore the public policy should not remain a mystery. And then there are several aspects in which you can contribute to public policy. You can contribute to increasing the awareness about the law. You can contribute to influencing the law. You can contribute to implementing what is existing public policy. You can then comment on the public policy, etc. And of course, public policy making is the top of the pyramid, but that's not everybody's game, and also not the only thing where you can contribute to public policy. I think that should be clear, and I hope the students in the policy boot camp have understood that, because this is what I was telling them this morning. On NITI Aayog is an amazing experiment by the Prime Minister, and which is saying that look, why should we only rely on external think tanks for our policy formulation, and also for the modalities for implementing a policy? We should have our own think tank. Now, this was the same idea that was there behind the Planning Commission, which NITI Aayog has replaced. But over the last 70 years, or 65 years, Planning Commission lost that bit about being a think tank and became much more a body for distributing resources to the states from the central government, rather than coming up with new ideas. Things now. And for NITI Aayog, 2 or 3 objectives that the Prime Minister had in mind, and which NITI Aayog was based on. See, one is to come up with new ideas by interacting with the people in the civil society or experts abroad, to come up with new ideas on what the government can do. And which the government should, in which direction should it go. That's the first part. The second part of it is that there are known policies, but whose implementation is wanting, is not happening as much. So what is the change that we require to do? And if that requires breaking down the silos and getting the ministries to work together, and that is NITI Aayog's job, to bring them together. And this is in the central government. And the third aspect is that to act as the intermediary between the central government and the state governments, to be seen as a partner of the state governments to solve their problems vis-a-vis the central government, and also to help the states to think about policy formulation and policy implementation in different ways. I think those are the three broad areas in which NITI Aayog is supposed to be working on. And it's one of the most fascinating things because, as I said, if you look at the three aspects, it covers almost like the 3 steps of the Vaman avatar.
Yeah.
Because it covers everything
that
you can see in the country. And therefore, to be working there was a great experience, especially with the Prime Minister.
You mentioned a lot of collaborative approach where you consult with the state governments and formulate policy, not just the design of the policy, but also the implementation of the policy. How does the common man, I mean the young policy enthusiasts who are out there who would want to play a role in this, is there a formal mechanism of involving them? Not just at the NITI Aayog, but if you would give a piece of advice to them about how they can play a role, because so they have a lot of ideas there, right?
So I explained to them today that public policy should be seen as a pyramid, right? And the pyramid, the bottom is where you can only be researching about public policy. I started my life on that. Why did the coal industry get nationalized? What can we do about it? That's researching. Second aspect is, commenting on it. And therefore you can comment on it and become an influencer by writing op-eds, by writing people and more importantly by not just commentator, becoming beyond the commentator as an influencer who communicates the public policy, who makes a public narrative for the public policy. In a democracy, the best public policy is that which comes from the people, what the people demand. And for that, what you need to do is to change the nature of the public narrative in support of something or against something or the other. Environment can be a best case, and so many other things. I often give the example of Dowry Act. Been implemented so long ago, has not been achieved so far. Why? Because there is not a public narrative in support of it. So that's the third level. So you can be a researcher, you can be a commentator, you can be an influencer, then you can be an implementer. Implementer meaning that there is a policy for women empowerment. But who will implement that? So you can be one of the most effective NGOs who can say, this is what we will do. I'll gather the women around me and make them empowered by doing this. And that's again a very important, because see, policy, what is to be done is done very often. How is to be done is very often ignored or forgotten. And that is where we in the civil society can play a very big role. So that's the role of the implementer, that you can do. And the final is the role of the policy maker, where there is the hierarchy. And the hierarchy itself is quite high. And by the way, the top of the pyramid, where the policy maker exists, is a very sharp, narrow combine. I mean, I was telling the people that at best, in our country of 140 crore, 10,000 people would be involved in that. At all the state and everything level, the cabinet ministers in the state or senior bureaucrats, etc. IAS is 3,000 and so on. So the very sharp, narrow apex at the pyramid. So now and even there, once you get there, it is not sure that you can make the impact that you want to make. Because then you face ideological issues, you face party specific issues, you face bureaucratic hurdles, etc. So not everybody, not every young person should only look at that. Because what happens quite often that if you look at only at the top, then you get at the bottom of the top and then you can stagnate there. And which is not such a good idea. You can do much more, you can be much more impactful outside the government than when you're inside. And I think this can be proved. So those are the different aspects of public policy, which I think is important to highlight, and it is, I think, important also in your own policy boot camp, therefore, to bring people from all these 5 areas. You can imagine a powerful journalist who writes without fear. And हमारे ज़माने में बहुत अच्छे लोग हुआ करते थे, गिरिलाल जैन, श्यामलाल, और जिनके मिनिस्टर्स बात रोज पढ़ते थे, और उनके बाद क्यों नहीं हम लोग कर सकते, वैसे हो सकते हैं ना। वो है, या फिर NGOs हैं, सेवा है, सेवा में जो काम हो रहा है अहमदाबाद में, कितना बड़ा काम हो रहा है विमेन एम्पावरमेंट के लिए, इन लोगों को पता लगना चाहिए कि कैसा। वही रिसर्चर की बात है, सारी की सारी रिसर्च हमारी Big 4 करती है, वो पता नहीं कहाँ से लाती है। अब हमें अगर यहाँ के बच्चे हमारे तैयार हो जाएं हाई क्वालिटी रिसर्च करने के लिए, तो बहुत बड़ा फर्क पड़ेगा, बिकॉज देन दे कैन बी ग्राउंडेड इन आवर रियलिटी एंड डू आवर वर्क रादर देन copy things from abroad. Yes, so these are the various aspects of public policy where the young people can aim to be there and can make a real impact.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I forgot was that also, evaluation. Policy, what is its impact?
Yeah.
Has it happened or not happened? And if it has happened, what is the outcome? Now, this is best done from people who are outside the government.
Exactly.
Because within the government, you will be biased.
Yeah.
So, the third party evaluation is what is required.
Yeah.
So, therefore, people can be trained here in making those evaluations. And in evaluation, quantification is the most important. So, then, you have to learn those quantitative techniques. You have to learn to set KPIs. You have to, start talking about timelines, etc. I think all of that is always a part of the public policy. Only being within the government is certainly not. In fact, I'm assured that in good democratic countries like Japan or US or Canada or UK, people outside the government play as important, if not even a more important role than those who are inside the government in formulating and implementing public policy.
So that's very interesting because, as you said, people only look at the top and they think those are the only opportunities. But not just are you saying that there are different layers, but everybody has a role, right? A researcher has a role, civil society members have a role, media has a role, right? And then politicians have a role, the policy makers, the bureaucrats have a role. And then I would also want to add that academic institutions like Rishihood also have a role,
a very big role. In fact, one of the categories that I mentioned, that's where I started out, was an academic. That's I mentioned here also. That was a researcher. Which is the academic institute.
Right.
What is the policy? What has it done? Can it be improved? That's all based upon. And in India today, that is extremely important because otherwise, what's happening is that public policy is living on the borrowed ideas of abroad.
Yeah.
And not on our own ideas. I mean, I was giving the example, to our folks today, to the students, that in our country, there's a tradition of protecting the environment.
Yeah.
And there have been many ways of doing so. But we haven't researched enough. We haven't thought about what they were and how they can be applied in the current context. So that the people, and in the West, the whole idea was to conquer the nature, and they didn't give a damn about the environment. And you can see the result of that. Now we are faced with that reality. How do we change that? By looking back at what we were able to do, and that's a very big, thing. That's where the academic institutions are. And the other good advantage about academic institutions, I mentioned, is that you can affect public policy without being at all accountable or responsible for it.
Yeah.
Nobody can point a finger to you. As a researcher, you do what you like, but still you can impact public policy. And I said that from 82 to 89, I worked as a researcher to influence public policy, which then took place in 1991. And it's a great satisfaction that I was able to do that. But as a researcher in an academic institution.
So thank you for saying that, because that is actually also the philosophy of Rishihood. The reason that we have built this university having its proximity to the national capital is also this, that we work on long-term policy changes, right? And institutions can carry that memory, work on an agenda for long enough. Particularly what you said, that we need ideas that are contextual to our country, right? So some things could have worked elsewhere and worked for those countries, but we have not spent enough time thinking about what works for us. When the whole world is grappling with climate change, right? And we are talking about sustainability as a part of our culture. So, but we have never brought it formally into policy. It's always been with society. That's something that we would also want to work on.
No, absolutely. So, the thing that I want here is that in our country, which is bigger than whole of Europe and more diverse than whole of Europe, and where every district, an average of 30 lakh people, is bigger than many countries in the world. The context doesn't have to be necessarily all India at all times. In fact, it is better to keep the context as less India, but more state and even district. Because that is where public policy is actually the most effective and the most needed, and is not happening. When I give this example very often, that the irrigation policy in Cherrapunji very different than irrigation policy in Gujarat. No.
Of course.
Similarly, for export policy, as important a thing as EXIM policy, what Punjab can fruitfully or profitably export will be very different from what Odisha can export. How can you have the same policy? So therefore, in Pahle India Foundation, we are actually now focusing very strongly at the state level and even at the district level.
Yeah.
We are doing a project, for estimating the district development product, the GDP at the district level, and mapping the economic activity at the district level. Because at that district level, you can actually bring all the stakeholders very effectively on the same platform.
Yes.
The district administration, the businessman, the academic, the civil society leader, the farmer, all can be at the same platform where accountability and monitoring is far more possible than at the level of the Delhi. So my suggestion to you would be to have mini-issued universities in every state. Because, it is at the state level that the rubber meets the road, not at any other level. Right?
And each state in our country is almost like a country of its own.
Almost
Even the population. It is.
Most states are bigger than all countries.
Yeah.
The state that I belong to is the 5th largest country in the world. UP.
Yes. Yes.
And every state, when you think about European, but even district, as I'm saying, Lithuania is about, I think, 2.9 million. Most of my districts are more than 30 lakhs.
Yeah, true.
So there you are. So if they can have a planning commission or a planning department, so can our districts have. And that we forget. But this bottom-up thing is also required to change this whole notion of ruler and ruled. That is when it will become a society where you have those governing and those, at the end of the governor being governed and directly related to each other. In Switzerland, every canton has its own directly elected government. Zilla Parishad gives you that choice, but it's not being implemented well. Articles, Amendment 73 and 74. If they are actually made much more effective, that will be the key actually to deepening our democracy and enriching our public policy towards making it effective for the common man. And not just, at the top.
So thank you for that, Rajivji. I think the core message that I get is that it's not an option that whether you want to engage with public policy or not, right? We all have to. It is for our collective future that we do it, and it is not just what's happening in the power corridors of Delhi, right up to the district level. And in fact, when you mentioned the 73rd and 74th Amendment, you're saying the Gram Sabhas, the villages, all of them, we have to actively be a part of this. Absolutely. So thank you for that message, and that's what we're trying to do at Rishiud as well.
Very nice.
And in collaboration with Pahle India.
We actually have taken the real essence of it. Each one of us is willy-nilly already a part of it. So therefore, might as well engage with it.
Thank you.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pahle.